The great hall of Vordenhall smelled of pine resin and roasted boar, and beneath that, something older. The cold breath of stone that had witnessed 2 centuries of feasts, quarrels, and the particular kind of silence that only gathered when a king entered a room. Elara felt it before she saw him. The conversations did not stop all at once. They dimmed, like a fire slowly starved of air, beginning at the far entrance where the iron-banded doors had swung open, traveling in a wave across the crowded tables, until it reached her corner near the hearth, where she stood, balancing 3 copper tankards and a platter of salted herring. She turned, and there he was. She had heard the stories, of course. Every girl who worked the tavern district of Vordenhall had heard them. Alpha King Ragnar Thornwall, youngest to claim the northern crown in 3 generations, ruler of the frost marches, from the Greyvale coast to the Spine Mountains. They said his hair was black as raven feathers. They said his eyes shifted color like storm clouds, dark gray in calm, near black in fury. They said he stood a full head above any man in his company, that wolves went quiet when he passed, that rival pack lords had dropped to their knees without being asked. She had assumed most of it was exaggeration. It was not exaggeration. He walked with the kind of unhurried certainty that wealthy men spent entire lifetimes trying to purchase, and never quite managed. His cloak, deep charcoal wool, trimmed at the collar with black fur, moved with him like a second shadow. His jaw was sharp beneath a close-cropped beard, dark as the rest of him. He was perhaps 25, no older, and yet something about the set of his shoulders suggested he had never once in his life been uncertain of where he was going. Elara realized she had stopped moving. She made herself move again. The hall had been hired for the evening by Lord Fenwick, a minor noble who collected favors the way other men collected debts, and who had apparently decided that impressing the Alpha King required the best cuts of venison and enough midwinter wine to flood a cellar. Elara and 4 other waitresses from the Salthorn Inn had been contracted to serve. It was not her usual work. She was a seamstress by trade, nimble-fingered, quiet, the kind of woman people forgot was in the room. But her landlord had raised the rent 3 weeks ago, and seamstresses did not become wealthy quickly. She refilled tankards. She carried platters. She moved around the edges of the room like water finding the lowest path, invisible and useful. She had almost made it through the entire evening without incident. Almost. It happened near the long table where the king's company had settled. 8 men in total, broad-shouldered and watchful, their weapons left at the door per custom, but their bearing making it clear the weapons were somewhat beside the point. Elara was delivering a second round of wine when a shoulder, she never determined whose, caught her tray. The cup did not shatter. It was copper, and copper does not shatter. But the wine inside it did not care about that distinction, and it arced gracefully through the candlelit air and landed squarely on the sleeve of the man seated to the Alpha King's right. The man, she would later learn his name was Bjarne, the king's war captain, shoved back from the table with a snarl that showed teeth. "You clumsy wretch!" "Forgive me," Elara said immediately, reaching for the cloth at her apron. "It was an accident, Accident." Bjarne's voice was not a question. He was looking at her with the particular contempt of a man who had never been required to extend patience to people of lesser rank. 2 silver marks, girl. That's a northern campaign cloak. You'll pay for the cleaning." 2 silver marks was 3 days of her wages from the inn. Yes, of course," she said carefully. She was thinking about the rent. She was thinking about keeping her voice even. "I'll speak with Lord Fenwick about—" "You'll speak to no one about nothing," Bjarne leaned forward. "You'll hand over the coin now, or I'll have you thrown out of this hall in front of everyone here." The room had gone quiet again. Not the whole room, just this corner of it. But it was enough. Elara felt the attention on her skin like heat. She looked at the stain on his cloak. She looked at his face. She thought carefully about what she was about to say, which was her first mistake, because careful thought requires a moment of visible hesitation, and visible hesitation, in that company, could be read as guilt. "Sir," she said, "with respect, I was struck from the side. The wine spilled because someone knocked my arm. I did not." "She's lying." Bjarne said it simply, as if the matter were resolved. He looked sideways. "My lord, the girl is lying." And that was when Elara made her second mistake. She looked at the king. She should not have looked directly at him. Not because of any rule. The hall was hired. She was contracted staff. She was permitted to exist. But because looking at him directly meant he looked back. And when the Alpha King Ragnar Thornwall's dark gray eyes settled on her, something happened in her chest that she could not immediately identify and did not have time to examine. His gaze was unhurried. It moved across her face the way a man reads a document he suspects contains a forgery, looking for the detail that does not belong. "Did you lie?" he asked. His voice was low, not quiet, low, the way a held note is low, with resonance underneath it. She felt it more than heard it. "No," Elara said. She held his gaze because she had told the truth, and she refused to look away from truth. "Someone struck my arm. I do not know who. The spill was not deliberate, and it was not entirely my fault. I will still pay for the cleaning if it is required of me, because I was carrying the tray, and the consequence is mine to bear. But I will not confess to clumsiness I did not commit." A long silence. Bjarne made a sound of outrage. "My lord, this is—" "Enough, Bjarne." The king had not taken his eyes off her. "I will decide what it is." He studied her for 3 more seconds. She counted them by the beat of her own pulse. Then he said, "The stain will wash out. It is midwinter wine, not ink." He turned back to his plate. "Get the girl a new tray." That was all. No apology. No acknowledgement that she had been right. No warmth of any kind. Just the quiet, absolute authority of a man settling a matter and returning to his meal. Bjarne's jaw was tight. He said nothing more. Elara retrieved her fallen tray. Her hands, she noticed distantly, were completely steady. She had expected them to shake. She did not look at the king again that evening. Or rather, she tried very hard not to, and was mostly unsuccessful, and spent the remaining hour of the feast acutely aware of exactly where he was in the room at all times. The way you are always aware of the largest flame in a dark space. 3 days passed. She had nearly convinced herself that the incident in the Great Hall was finished, a minor embarrassment, a near miss, an evening she would retell in a few years with some amusement. The Alpha King had not condemned her. She had kept her dignity. Life proceeded. Then she saw the boy. He was sitting alone on the low stone wall that bordered the market square, in the pale gray morning light that the north permitted in place of sunshine, and he could not have been more than 6 years old. He had the Alpha King's coloring, dark hair, sharp-cut features that would one day be striking, but everything about him in that moment was small and cold and frightened in a way that he was clearly trying very hard not to show. He was not crying. He looked like he had decided, at some point, that crying was not an option, and was now managing the fallout of that decision alone. Elara stopped. She was on her way to collect a fabric order from the merchant district, late, with cloth samples in her basket, and not enough time to spare. She looked at the boy. She looked at the street around him, busy with morning traffic, merchants and cart drivers, and the usual crowd of Vordenhall waking up, and saw no one moving toward him with purpose. She walked over. "Are you lost?" she asked, crouching to his level. He looked at her with eyes that were his father's in shade, dark gray, with something complicated moving behind them. "No," he said. "Are you cold?" "No." She pulled the woven shawl from her basket. It was meant to be delivered. She would apologize later. And held it out. "The wind has teeth this morning." He stared at the shawl. Something moved across his face. He took it. "I am waiting." he said, with the gravity of someone who has been waiting a long time. My attendant was supposed to come back. He has been a long time. What is your name? She asked. A pause, as if he were deciding how much to disclose. Leif. Elara recognized the name. Every person in Vordenhall knew the Alpha King had a son, a young son, his heir, whose mother had died 2 winters past. She looked at this small, serious boy holding her shawl around his shoulders and felt something press against her ribs. Well, Leif, she said, I know this market very well. Shall I wait with you until your attendant returns? He looked at her with the particular skepticism of a child who has been let down before. Why? Because it is cold and you are alone, and those are sufficient reasons. He considered this, then, all right. She sat beside him on the wall. She did not chatter at him. She had learned, from years of quiet work, that children who are frightened do not want to be peppered with reassurance. She simply sat and watched the market, and after a few minutes he seemed to relax slightly, the rigid line of his small shoulders easing. Do you know how to make knots? He asked. She blinked. I do. My father's men make knots, for ropes and ships. Can you show me? She had no rope. She had a length of silk cord in her basket, meant for a client's dress. She used it anyway. She was demonstrating a figure 8 when she heard the rapid footsteps, too fast for casual approach, and looked up to find 2 of the king's guard crossing the square at near run, their faces tight with something she recognized as the particular panic of people who have lost a child they were responsible for protecting. Behind them, moving at a pace that was controlled but barely, was the Alpha King. He saw Leif first. The tight set of his face shifted, not to relief, not visibly, but something in him became less dangerous, the way a blade is less dangerous when it is sheathed. Then he saw Elara, crouched beside his son, a length of silk cord between their hands. His eyes went dark. You. His voice was flat. No recognition in it yet, or if there was, it was buried under suspicion. What are you doing with my son? Elara stood slowly. He was alone on the wall, my lord. His attendant had not returned. I waited with him. She was teaching me knots, Leif said. He held up the silk cord with the small, proud air of someone presenting evidence. The king did not look at the cord. He looked at Elara with the same measuring attention he had turned on her 3 days ago. And this time it was longer and less comfortable. I know your face, he said. Yes, my lord. I served at Lord Finwick's feast. Something flickered. Not quite recognition, more like confirmation of a suspicion he had already formed. The lying waitress. The words landed like a splash of cold water. I told you then that I did not lie, Elara said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. I tell you now the same. Papa. Leif's small voice, surprisingly firm. She was kind to me. She gave me her shawl. The king looked down at his son. Something shifted in his expression, subtle, hidden almost immediately, but she caught it. The way his gaze softened at the edges when it reached the boy, the almost invisible exhale. He looked back at her. Why were you near the palace grounds? He asked. I was not near the palace grounds. I was passing through the market on my way to the merchant district. The wall where your son was sitting is public space, my lord. I have no business with the palace. What is your name? Elara Voss. I am a seamstress. I live on Copper Lane. He said nothing for a moment. One of the guards behind him had come forward and was attempting to guide Leif away. The boy resisted, looking over his shoulder at Elara with an expression she could not entirely read. My shawl, she said. When your son is finished with it. The king's eyes came back to her. He had, she noticed now that she was looking, and she was trying very hard not to look too carefully, a small scar through his left eyebrow. It was the kind of scar that maps a specific history, a specific impact. She found herself wondering about it, and then found herself irritated that she was wondering about it. You will be compensated for it, he said. I don't want compensation. I want my shawl back. A beat of silence. Something moved across his face, too fast to name. You'll have it, he said. And then he turned and walked away, his cloak a moving shadow. His son's small hand eventually caught and held at his side as they crossed the square. Elara stood for a moment in the cold morning air. She retrieved her basket. She went to collect her fabric order. She did not think about the color of his eyes when he had looked at her. The shawl was returned the following morning. A young page arrived at her door on Copper Lane at the improbable hour of 7 bells, carrying the shawl freshly cleaned and, inexplicably, her silk cord wound neatly beside it, returned as though it were a valuable thing. The page said nothing, except that he had been instructed to deliver it. He left before she could ask questions. She stood in her doorway with the shawl and the cord in her hands, and tried to determine what to make of this, and could not. She put the cord away. She returned to work. It was 3 more days before anything happened. The midwinter festival of Vordenhall was not a quiet affair. It had not been a quiet affair in 200 years, and showed no signs of reform. The whole of the city gathered in the central square, which was strung with lanterns from every possible overhang, the light golden and unsteady in the river wind. There were fire jugglers and spiced wine stalls, and a market that sprawled half a league in 3 directions. And at the center of it all, a great carved ice pavilion, where the nobility gathered to observe the lighting of the midwinter flame. Elara was not there for the flame. She was there because the Seamstress Guild had contracted 3 booths at the festival market, and someone needed to mind the 3rd booth, and she was the someone available. She was selling lengths of embroidered linen when she heard the crash. It came from the pavilion, a sound like winter itself breaking. The crowd around her went still for a fraction of a second, and then erupted into the chaotic opposite of stillness. Later, she would piece together what had happened. A decorative overhead structure inside the pavilion, a chandelier of carved ice and suspended glass spheres, meant to scatter midwinter light like stars, had been struck. Whether by accident or design, it dropped. Not all at once, but in pieces, heavy, glittering, lethal pieces, falling like the kind of rain that cuts. In the moment, Elara did not piece anything together. She heard the sound, she heard the scream, a small, high scream, distinctly a child's, and she moved. She pushed through the crowd that was pushing the opposite direction. She ducked under the pavilion's low entrance arch. She saw the chandelier pieces still falling, heard the musical horror of it, saw the guards scattering. And there, in the center of it, frozen with his arms over his head in a posture that was brave and useless in equal measure, was Leif. She reached him in 3 strides. She covered him, her body over his, arms braced against the marble floor, and felt the impacts. 2, 3, 4. The sharp kiss of glass edges through the fabric of her coat, the cold bite of ice chunks against her back and shoulders. She pressed Leif flat, kept her head down, and held on until the sound stopped. Silence. Then his voice, muffled against her arm. I can't breathe. She shifted her weight. Sorry. Can you breathe now? Yes. Are you hurt? She was, probably. She could feel the places where she wasn't, which is how you know. But she looked at the boy, checking him first, methodically, the way her mother had taught her to check fabric for damage, running her eyes over every visible inch, and found no cuts, no blood, nothing broken. I'm fine, she said. Are you? Leif looked at her with his father's eyes. They were very wide. There is glass in your hair, he said. She reached up carefully. He was right. So there is, she said. Then the guards were there, and the voices, and the chaos that follows the end of a sudden dangerous thing, and she sat up carefully in the wreckage of ice and glass and let someone take Leif from her arms. And then, through the thinning crowd, she saw the king. He had been in the pavilion, not near his son when it happened, a fact she saw him carry in the rigid line of his jaw as he crossed the floor toward them. He moved through his own guards the way water moves through a crowd, around, between, unstoppable. He dropped to one knee beside Leif. She did not watch the reunion. It seemed private in a way that the whole open pavilion could not make public. She sat on the cold marble and looked at her hands, which were shaking now. Mildly, the small, honest trembling of a body that had been afraid and was now processing the fact that the fear was over. "You're bleeding." His voice. Close. She looked up. He was crouching in front of her, the Alpha King, in his midwinter ceremonial cloak, on the floor of the pavilion with broken glass around them, looking at her shoulder with an expression she could not name. It was not the measuring look he had given her before. It was something more unsettled than that. She looked at her shoulder. A glass edge had found its way through the coat seam. The cut was not deep, but it was committed. "It will be fine," she said. "It will be tended," he said. It was not an offer. She wanted to argue. She looked at his face, at the way his jaw was set, at the thing moving behind his eyes that she still could not name, and decided for once not to. They took her to a small antechamber off the main pavilion, where a healer was already dealing with 2 minor injuries from the chandelier fall. The healer, a brisk, efficient woman named Marta, who smelled of dried herbs, cleaned Elara's cut with something that stung sharply, and then began the work of stitching. The king did not leave. This surprised her. He stood near the door, not quite watching, turned slightly away as though he had simply paused here by accident. But he did not leave, and she was aware of him the entire time, with the same acuity she had felt in the great hall, the sense of being near something large and warm and carefully still. "You would have been inside before the fall," Marta said to her, not unkindly, focused on her needle. "Were you looking for someone?" "I heard a child scream," Elara said. Marta's hands paused for a moment, then continued. From near the door, the king said nothing, but she felt the attention shift. "That was brave," Marta said quietly. "It was instinct," Elara said. "I don't think I deserve credit for instinct." Another pause. Marta finished, pressed a clean cloth to the site, and began bandaging. Her hands were gentle, practiced, the hands of someone who had done this in worse conditions than a warm antechamber. "You'll want to keep it clean and dry for 3 days. If the redness spreads, come back." "Thank you," Elara said. Marta gathered her things and left. They were alone. Elara became aware of this the way you become aware of a change in weather, not all at once, but in accumulation. The temperature of the room, the quality of the silence, the fact that the king had taken 2 steps away from the door without appearing to have moved. She stood carefully, testing her shoulder's patience. It protested, but accepted her terms. "You should rest," he said. "I have a booth at the market," she said. "Someone needs to—" "I will have someone see to it." She looked at him. He was looking at her with an expression that was difficult to read under the best of circumstances. And these were not the best of circumstances. The room was lit by a single oil lamp, and his face was half in shadow, and there was a cut above his own cheekbone that she had not noticed before, a small line of dried blood that meant he had not been entirely clear of the fall himself. "You're bleeding too," she said. He touched his face, seemingly unaware of this until that moment. He looked at the fingertips that came away dark and said nothing. "Here," she said, before she had entirely decided to. She took the clean corner of the cloth Marta had left, moved toward him, and stopped. The distance between them was 3 handspans. She became aware of this precisely. "May I?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he inclined his head. She reached up and pressed the cloth gently to the cut. It was near his temple, not serious, but it needed pressure. She was close enough to see the grain of his beard, to feel the warmth coming off his skin like a banked coal. He was very still under her hands. The absolute stillness of someone who has learned to control their body completely and is currently employing that control for reasons she could not guess. She could feel his breath. This was closer than she had been to anyone in a long time. The recognition of that fact arrived without her permission. "Hold this," she said softly, and guided his hand to the cloth. Her fingers brushed his knuckles. His hand was warm, the skin of it rougher than she had expected. A working hand, not a ceremonial one. She stepped back. He held the cloth where she had placed it and watched her with eyes that had gone very dark. "Elara Voss," he said. It was strange, hearing her name in his voice. The vowels were careful, as if he had rehearsed them, or as if he was paying attention in a way he did not usually pay attention to names. "Yes, my lord?" The longest pause yet. "My son speaks well of you," he said finally. It was not what she had expected him to say. She did not know what she had expected him to say, but it was not that. "He is a good boy," she said. "Brave. He didn't cry on the wall. He was frightened, but he didn't cry." Something crossed the king's face, swift and private, and gone before she could be certain of it. "No," he said. "He doesn't often cry." A beat of silence, weighted differently than the previous ones. "You thought I was lying," she said. Not an accusation, just the fact, brought into the open because it had been sitting between them since the great hall, and she was tired of walking around it. He looked at her. "I was wrong." 3 words. No elaboration, no apology beyond the statement itself, which she understood was, from him, the same thing. She nodded. "All right." He lowered the cloth. The cut had stopped bleeding. He looked at it, at the cloth, red at its center, clean at its edges. And then he looked at her, and she did not look away. And for 5 seconds, the lamplight held them there, in a kind of amber stillness that she thought about later, in the dark of her room on Copper Lane, more times than she intended to. "Good night, Elara Voss," he said. "Good night, my lord." She gathered her coat and left. She was halfway across the square before she realized she was pressing her hand against her bandaged shoulder, not because it hurt, but because it was warm, and warmth in the winter dark feels like something worth holding on to. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday. It was written on heavy cream paper, sealed in charcoal wax impressed with the Thornwall wolf, and delivered by the same young page who had returned her shawl. It requested, and the requesting language was used, she noted, rather than commanding, her presence at the palace the following morning, for the purpose of discussing a commission. The commission in question was described in one line: "Clothing suitable for a boy of 6 years, for the midwinter court presentation." She read it 3 times. She told herself she was going because it was the palace, and a palace commission would pay well, and she needed the money, and these things were true. She did not tell herself why her hands were careful when she dressed the next morning, or why she chose the blue wool instead of the brown. The palace of Vordenhall was exactly what a palace in the frozen north should be. Massive, stone-boned, softened at the edges by tapestries and firelight, smelling of wood smoke and cold air, and something resinous she couldn't name. A steward led her through corridors that were wide enough for men in full armor to pass comfortably, which she suspected was intentional, and delivered her to a small receiving room where a fire was already burning. She waited. She heard Leif before she saw him, his footsteps quick and uneven in the way of children who are hurrying, followed by the heavier step of someone keeping pace without effort. Leif came through the door first. When he saw her, something lit in his face, the unguarded brightness of a child who has not yet learned to conceal pleasure. "You came," he said, as if this were uncertain until this moment. "I was invited," she said. "I asked Papa to invite you." He said it with complete matter-of-factness, as though this were a normal thing to report. "I said your clothes were nice, and that you would make me something better than Hilda does. Hilda makes me things that scratch." "That is a very sound argument," she said. Behind him, the king stood in the doorway. He was not in ceremonial dress this morning, a plain dark tunic, the sleeves rolled to the forearm, a sword at his belt that looked worn with use. He looked, somehow, more dangerous in the simplicity of it. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Thank you for coming," he said. It was 4 words she suspected did not come easily to him, and she received them accordingly. The commission became 3 visits. The first was practical. She took Leif's measurements, spoke with him about colors. He had strong opinions. He wanted something in deep green, like the forest, but a better forest, and made careful notes. The king was present for part of this visit, not participating, but not absent, sitting near the window with documents, or so it appeared, though she noticed the documents seemed to require very little of his attention. The second visit brought the first fitting, and Leif's enthusiastic verdict, "It doesn't scratch," which she received as high praise. The king was present again, near the window again, documents again. Halfway through the fitting, when Leif had been sent to the next room with his nurse to change back into his everyday clothes, she said without looking up from her needlework, "You don't have to stay for these, my lord. I am not going to misplace your son." "I'm aware," he said. She looked up. He was watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the carefully measured regard of someone who is deciding how much to reveal. "Then why?" she began. "The documents needed attention," he said. She looked at the documents. They were, she now clearly saw, blank. She looked back at him. Something moved through his expression, too quickly to name, but she thought it might have been the very beginning of something that a less controlled face would have shown more clearly. She returned to her needlework without saying anything more, but her heart was making a case she had not invited it to make, and she spent the remainder of the afternoon being extremely professional and precise and not thinking about it at all. The third visit came with an unexpected element. She arrived to find the palace quieter than usual. Fewer servants in the corridors, the particular hush of a place waiting for something. The steward led her to a different room than usual, larger, and explained with a kind of careful neutrality that a situation had arisen and the king would be delayed. "Shall I come back another?" "No." The steward hesitated. "He said specifically that you were to wait." She waited. An hour passed. She worked on a small repair she had brought with her. The fire was warm. Through the window, which faced south, actual sunlight was visible, unusual for this latitude in midwinter, the brief pale gold of an afternoon that was already thinking about ending. She heard him before she saw him, not his footsteps this time, something else, a sound she could not immediately identify, low and unsteady, not the voice she associated with him. She stood. He came through the door, and she saw it. He was carrying Leif. The boy was asleep against his father's shoulder. Or perhaps not asleep, the stillness slightly different, more deliberate. The king's face was the face of someone who has been in the same state of controlled calm for so long that the muscles of it have become tired. He was still controlled. He was very nearly not. "He was at the training ground," he said, without her asking. "He wanted to see the horses. I told him to wait inside." His voice was flat, in the way of voices that are keeping a great deal from being flat. He did not wait inside. He was thrown. "Is he bruised, frightened, nothing broken?" He looked down at Leif's face against his shoulder. He did not cry. She recognized, in the way he said it, that this was both a pride and a sorrow. "He cried when I got to him," the king added, very quietly. "Just for a moment." She thought she understood something then, not about the boy, but about the father, about a man who had built his world around being sufficient, being present, being everything that was needed, and who was standing here with his child's weight in his arms and a particular kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with the body. "Sit down," she said. He looked at her. "Please," she added. "You can stand again in a moment if you prefer. But sit for a minute." He sat. She refilled the cup of water on the table beside him and set it within reach. She did not offer it to him, just set it there, close. Then she sat across from him and took up her work again, not because she cared about it, but because having something for her hands meant he could exist in the room without being observed. The fire crackled. Leif's breathing was steady. After a while, the rigidity in the king's shoulders eased. Not much, not entirely, but enough. "You were a seamstress's daughter?" he asked, without preamble. She looked up. "Yes, my mother." "And your father?" "A fisherman. He was lost at sea when I was 8. I am sorry. It was a long time ago." She meant it, not as dismissal, but as fact. "My mother raised me with thread and patience. I think I have more of one than the other." "Which one?" "Thread," she said. "I have an inexhaustible supply of thread." He made a sound. It was very small and very brief, and she was not entirely certain it was a laugh. She had no reference for what his laugh sounded like, if he had one. But it shifted the atmosphere in the room in a way that nothing else had. She thought, "There you are." And then she thought, "Don't." There was a lord who came to court on the 14th day of midwinter. His name was Aldrich Vane, and he arrived with 30 men and a particular kind of smiling certainty that Elara, watching from the courtyard where she had come to deliver Leif's completed clothes, recognized immediately. She had seen it on creditors. She had seen it on the men who had come to her mother's door in the winter after her father died. It was the certainty of a person who has identified a pressure point and is about to apply their thumb. She did not know what the pressure point was. She learned later, in pieces. Lord Aldrich had a claim, a treaty claim, wrapped in paper and precedent, on a section of the Eastern Frost March. He had come to press it in person, in court, in front of the northern lords who had gathered for midwinter, because he had calculated that public pressure and private threats delivered simultaneously had a historical advantage. What he had not calculated was the king. She watched, from the edge of the great hall where she was waiting for Leif's nurse, as Aldrich spread his documents on the high table and began his address. He was smooth, practiced, precisely so, and the court around him was listening with the careful attention of people who are determining which way a wind is blowing. The king listened. He did not speak until Aldrich had finished. Then he said 3 sentences. She was too far to hear them, but she saw their effect. The way Aldrich's smiling certainty flickered, the way his men exchanged glances, the way the court's posture shifted, as if they had all collectively decided something. Whatever he had said, it was sufficient. Aldrich left the following morning. He did not press his claim. She asked Leif, later, what his father had said. Leif, who had been lurking near the hall in a way he had been expressly told not to, reported with solemn accuracy. He said that the treaty Aldrich was citing had been signed under duress and invalidated in the 2nd year of my grandfather's reign, and that if Aldrich wished to press a fraudulent claim in the court of the Frost March, he was welcome to do so in writing, and the king's response would also be in writing, and that response would be made public. Elara blinked. "How do you remember all of that?" "I practice," Leif said. "Papa says that words are weapons, and a man should know how to use them." She thought about this for the rest of the day. She found the king in the courtyard that evening, alone, or nearly so. One guard at a distance sufficient to be discreet. He was looking north, toward where the mountains were invisible in the dark, and the first stars were punching through the cloud. She had not planned to be here. She had stayed too late finishing a repair and taken a wrong corridor on her way out. She had taken the wrong corridor deliberately, and she knew it, and she had not examined that knowledge too closely. "My lord," she said. He turned. He did not appear surprised to see her, which surprised her. Elara. Her name again, in his voice, with the same careful attention as before. "I heard Lord Aldrich left," she said. "He did. And his claim is without merit and always was." A pause. He thought distance from the capital would make us easier to intimidate. He was mistaken. The wind came off the mountains, even at this distance, cold enough to make itself known. She pulled her coat tighter. He did not appear to feel it, or if he did, he had long since made his peace with it. "You're always cold," he said. Not unkindly, an observation. "I'm from the harbor district," she said. "The wind there is wet. This wind is dry. They're different cold." "Both are cold." "Yes, but knowing what kind helps." He looked at her with an expression that was doing something she couldn't parse, something that was not the measuring attention of before, not the controlled care of before, but something that had no name in the vocabulary she had assembled for him so far. "You should have a warmer coat," he said. "I'm saving for one," she said. "I will—" "No," she said without heat. "Thank you, but no." He stopped. He looked at her with something that she now thought, studying him carefully in the cold starlight, was respect. "All right," he said. They stood in the quiet for a moment. The night around them was the particular color of northern winter after dusk. Not black, but a very deep blue. The color of something that has given up on pretending to be warm. "Leif showed me his new tunic," he said, 3 times. "He has strong opinions about green," she said. "He has strong opinions about everything." A beat. "He gets it from his mother." It was the first time he had mentioned her. She did not press. But she noticed that he had, that the words had come, unprompted, the way something comes when it has been waiting for a place to go. "She sounds formidable," Elara said carefully. She was. He said it with the directness of someone who has learned to say a hard thing plainly. "She was also kind. Leif has that too." A pause. "I find myself uncertain which is the more difficult inheritance." She thought about her own mother, about patience and thread, about raising a daughter alone in a coastal city while grief was still fresh. She thought about what it meant to give a child something that is also heavy. "I think both," she said. "I think they require each other." He looked at her. "Formidable and kind," she said. "One without the other breaks, I think. One is armor and one is the thing worth protecting." She paused. "Or maybe I have them backwards." "No," he said. "You don't." The wind moved between them, found nothing to say, and moved on. Midwinter's last night was always the longest celebration. Bonfires across the city, the drinking and the music, and the accumulated goodwill of people who had survived another dark season together. Elara was, for the first time, not working it. Her guild contracts were completed. She was there simply as herself, which was a novel sensation. She found a spot on the steps of the old merchant hall where the view of the central square was clear, and she sat with a cup of warm spiced cider and watched the bonfires, and tried to remember the last time she had attended a festival, as a person, rather than a function. She had been there perhaps an hour when she heard, "Is this place taken?" She looked up. Leif. Behind him, at a distance that was close enough to be within earshot and far enough to be deniable, his father. She moved to make room. Leif dropped down beside her with the enthusiasm of a child who has had an excellent day and wants to process it aloud. He told her, in considerable detail, about the bonfire he had been allowed to stand close to, the spiced cake he had eaten approximately 2 of, the acrobat he had watched perform. She was very small and she went very high. And the dog belonging to one of the court lords that had briefly escaped its leash and run through the feast. She listened to all of it. She laughed at the dog story, which was genuinely funny in Leif's telling, and she felt the evening settle around her like something comfortable and unfamiliar. At some point, Leif's energy spent itself, as children's energy does, not gradually but suddenly, like a candle between one breath and the next. He leaned against her side without ceremony, the warm, heavy weight of a sleepy child, and was asleep in minutes. She sat very still, because waking a sleeping child felt unkind. From his position a few steps away, the king looked at his son against her side and said nothing. His expression was the most unguarded she had seen it. Not soft, exactly, but without the habitual armor. He looked at his sleeping son with something that was love without performance, love that had nowhere to be and nothing to prove, and was therefore simply itself. She looked away. It felt private. "He is comfortable with you," the king said quietly. Not an observation, almost a question. "He is easy to be comfortable with," she said. "He is a good person. He will be a good man." He was quiet for a moment. "You think so?" "He feels things correctly," she said. "He knew it was wrong to let me sit alone in the cold. He knew it was wrong that your attendant left him waiting. He knows what kindness requires, which is rarer than it should be." She paused. Someone taught him that. The silence afterward was weighted. "His mother," he said, finally. "And his father," she said. He looked at her. The bonfires were far enough away that the light here was mostly moonlight, silver and unsteady, the kind that makes everything look like the edge of something. "I am not a gentle man," he said. It was not self-pity. It was accurate. "No," she agreed. "But you are here. And you stayed for the fitting appointments, even when the documents were blank. And when he fell, you carried him yourself." She felt heat rise in her face and was grateful for the cold. Those things are not gentleness, perhaps, but they are not nothing. He looked at her for a long time. "Elara," he said. Just the name. And then, as if the name had used up all the space available, nothing else. She became very aware of the distance between them. 4 steps. 3, because he had moved without appearing to. The bonfires crackled across the square. Leif breathed against her side. Somewhere in the city, a musician was playing something old and modal on a stringed instrument, the notes rising and dispersing in the cold air like sparks. "I owe you an apology," he said. "A proper one, not just a correction." She looked at him. "In the great hall," he said, "I accepted Bjarna's reading over your own testimony. I had no basis for that beyond habit. The habit of assuming that the version that confirmed a pattern was more reliable than the version I had not heard before." His jaw was set, but his eyes were direct. "That was wrong." "It was," she said. She kept her voice even. "I'm glad you know it." "I should have known it then." "Yes." She paused. "But you also stopped him. You could have said nothing." "That is a very low bar." "It is the bar that was present," she said. "I try to measure from the bar that was present, not the bar I would have preferred." Something crossed his face, complex and quick and real. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "Thread and patience," she said. He made the small sound again, the one she was not certain was a laugh, but that transformed the room, or in this case, the cold stone steps, in a way that nothing else did. She thought, "There you are again." This time, she did not add the second thought. Spring did not arrive for another 6 weeks. In the north, it never arrived cleanly. It crept in, degree by degree, the ice thinning and the daylight lengthening by minutes too small to measure individually, and yet accumulated, entirely transforming. She was not at the palace every week. She had her work, her guild obligations, her rooms on Copper Lane, the steady rhythm of a life she had built carefully and that she did not intend to abandon. But she was there often enough. Leif had commissioned, through channels that increasingly resembled simply sending a page to find her, a variety of increasingly specific things. A pouch for keeping horse chestnuts in, a sash for his practice sword, a small embroidered banner for his bedchamber, featuring a wolf. These were, she was aware, mostly pretexts, and she was aware that she was not exactly discouraging them. The king was always somewhere in the vicinity during these visits, near the window, or in the corridor she passed through, or in the training yard she could see from the room where she worked, the sound of practice swords, a rhythmic punctuation to her concentration. One afternoon in early thaw, she passed through the training yard on her way to meet Leif and stopped. He was sparring. She had seen men spar before. She had seen it at festivals, in market squares, the performance of skill dressed for an audience. This was not that. This was the thing itself, efficient, economical, each movement precise as cut cloth, nothing wasted. His opponent was half his size and giving a creditable account of himself. The king was better. She stood longer than she intended. He saw her when the bout ended. He was breathing harder than usual, just slightly, enough to be human, and he was looking at her with an expression she had given up trying to parse entirely. She had instead begun simply noticing its qualities, present, focused, unlike the way he looked at anything else. "You sew at odd hours," he said. "I observe at odd hours," she said. "It balances." He looked at her for a moment. Then he walked toward her, and the training yard fell away. Guards finding other things to attend to, the opponent retreating with remarkable efficiency. "Leif wants to learn," he said. "He watches from the window." "I told him he is too young." "Is he? For this?" He gestured at the yard, at the swords. "Yes, but—" He paused. "He could learn knots, the kind that matter, sailing knots, rigging, things that have use beyond decoration." He looked at her. "You knew knots, in the market." "A few," she said. "My father was a fisherman. I watched." "Would you teach him?" She blinked. "I am a seamstress, not a—" "You know knots," he said. "He trusts you. Those are the relevant qualifications." She thought about it. She thought about Leif's serious, small face, the way he had held up the silk cord as proof. She thought about a boy who needed things beyond what a court full of cautious, formal adults could give him. Simple things. Real things. "Yes," she said. He nodded once. Then, as if the conversation were finished, he looked away. And then he looked back. "There is a feast next week," he said. "For the thaw, the northern lords and their households." A pause. And she recognized the pause now, the controlled stillness of someone choosing words the way she chose thread, for strength and color and the particular tension required. "It would be—" He stopped. Started again. "I would like you to be there, not as staff." The words arrived in her chest like something warm and unexpected. "As what?" she asked carefully. He met her eyes. His were, in the afternoon light of the training yard, not gray at all. They had gone a shade she had not seen before, something gold at the edges. And she did not know what that meant, but she knew that it changed something. "As someone I asked," he said. She stood in the pale, early thaw light, with the smell of cold stone and wood smoke around her, and the sound of the city somewhere beyond the walls, and she thought about her rooms on Copper Lane, and her guild work, and the careful life she had made. She thought about Leif asleep against her side, and blank documents, and a shawl returned with a neatly wound cord. She thought about a cup of water set within reach without being offered. "All right," she said. "I will be there." He held her gaze for one moment longer than necessary, and she held it too. And then something settled between them. Not resolved, not finished, but present and decided and real. She wore the blue wool. The feast was loud and warm and full of the particular extravagance of northern lords celebrating the end of winter, with the commitment of people who understand that winter returns. She was not entirely comfortable. She was not born to these rooms, these people, this register of conversation. But she was present, and she did not disappear into corners. And when Leif found her and dragged her to meet someone he considered important, the dog from the winter feast, as it turned out, now on a proper leash, she followed him. The king found her near the hearth, later in the evening. He said nothing. He was not a man who narrated his intentions. He simply stood beside her, and the room arranged itself around this fact, and she felt the warmth of him at her left side and thought, with a clarity she had not expected, "This is not a beginning. This has already begun. I am simply catching up to it." The green tunic was a success, she said. He slept in it twice before Hilda caught him, he said. She pressed her lips together. I'm choosing to be flattered. You should be. The fire crackled. The room around them was all warm light and voices. He was close enough that she could feel the subtle shift in air when he breathed, and she thought about thread. The way a single thread, properly placed and pulled taut, becomes the thing that holds everything else in place. You never see it once the work is finished, but without it, everything comes apart. She thought, some things are worth learning to bear the weight of. She did not say this aloud. She didn't have to. Beside her, very quietly, he turned his hand so that his knuckles brushed hers. Once, deliberate, unhurried. She turned her hand. Their fingers settled together like two halves of something that had always been meant to fit. The fire burned. The feast continued. Outside, the frost march was making its slow annual decision about spring, and the ice was thinning. And somewhere above the clouds, there were stars that did not care about kingdoms or frost or the long, careful distances between two people who are finally done with being careful. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. They didn't need to. He said words are weapons, and a man should know how to use them. She thought, yes, and sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to put them down. The court of Vordenhall had, over 3 years, grown quietly accustomed to a number of changes. The Alpha King still moved through corridors like weather, purposeful, unhurried, impossible to ignore. He still silenced rooms when he entered them. He still had the ability to end a diplomatic negotiation in 3 sentences. He still wore his authority the way other men wore skin, completely, without thinking about it. He was also, as of 6 months ago, the father of a daughter. Her name was Astrid. She was small and pink and possessed of an opinion about everything, which she communicated primarily through volume. She had her mother's eyes, clear and direct, and her father's jaw, which on a 6-month-old gave her the expression of a very small person who has decided something and will not be moved. Ragnar Thornwall, Alpha King of the Frost March, was absolutely undone by her. Elara discovered this on a Tuesday morning. She had been up since the pre-dawn hour. Astrid had decided, with the cheerful arbitrariness of infants, that 3 in the morning was an excellent time to have feelings, and had finally, at some point around 6 bells, returned the baby to her cradle and collapsed back into bed. When she woke at 8, the bed beside her was empty. This was not unusual. Ragnar rose early. He had councils, training, the various administrative demands of ruling a substantial portion of the northern territories. He was not a man who lingered in bed past sunrise. She found him in the nursery. He did not hear her come in. He was standing over the cradle in his full morning dress, sword at his belt, council cloak half-fastened, making a face. Not a frightening face, not the controlled expression of a king in public. A face. Eyebrows raised, cheeks puffed slightly, mouth curved in a shape she had previously not known him capable of. Astrid, for her part, was staring up at him with the absolute focused gravity of an infant encountering something remarkable. And then she made a sound, a small, pleased, wet sound, and waved one fist. Ragnar made the face again. Astrid made the sound again. Elara stood in the doorway with her hair loose and her feet bare on the cold stone, and felt something move through her that had no name except this. This. Exactly this. Forever. "You're going to be late for council," she said. He startled. Barely, he was too controlled for a proper startle, but she caught it, and turned. The face disappeared. His expression returned to its usual architecture. "She was awake," he said, with the dignity of a man explaining a military decision. "She's always awake." "She was looking at the ceiling, I thought." "You thought you would come make faces at her?" A pause. "I was not making faces." "Ragnar." I was making... He stopped. His jaw did a complicated thing. Expressions of encouragement. Elara pressed her lips together very firmly. She crossed the room, looked into the cradle at her daughter, who was now making the face back at her father, which was remarkable considering she had never been told what a face was, and then looked back at her husband. She has your frown, she said. She has your stubbornness, he said. She has your stubbornness. She has my stubbornness, with better instincts about when to deploy it. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. He looked down at Astrid, who was still making the face, and the corner deepened. She is extraordinary, he said, very quietly, with absolute sincerity. Yes, Elara said. She is. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached down, with the same deliberate care he brought to everything, whether signing treaties or carrying his injured son, and offered Astrid his finger. She grabbed it immediately with both hands and held on with the ferocity of someone who has been waiting for exactly this. He looked at his daughter, holding his finger, and he looked like a man whose whole world had just rearranged itself around a very small person and found the new arrangement better than the original. Elara put her hand on his arm. He covered her hand with his, still careful, always warm. And they stood like that in the pale morning light, the three of them, while Astrid held court from her cradle. You are going to be very late for council, Elara said. They can wait, he said. He was, in fact, 40 minutes late for council. Bjarne, his war captain, now somewhat reformed in his opinions about certain seamstresses, had been circling the council chamber for 20 minutes when Ragnar finally arrived, Astrid's small handprint visible on the shoulder of his cloak in a smear of whatever she had recently had for breakfast. Bjarne stared at the handprint. Ragnar took his seat at the head of the table, as though nothing were unusual. Well, he said, the lords of the council, experienced men who had survived campaigns and political crises and 2 generations of Thornwall authority, looked at the handprint on the cloak and collectively decided, without a word passing between them, that they had not seen it. The eastern trade route, said Lord Fenwick, unfolding his documents with great attention. As discussed. Bjarne sat down. He spent the first 10 minutes of the meeting trying to formulate how to tell his king that he had a handprint on his shoulder. He spent the next 10 minutes deciding he would rather face the eastern horde unarmed than attempt this conversation. He spent the final 20 minutes watching his king, who was as precise and decisive as he had always been, who was reading documents and making rulings and holding the room with the authority of someone who does not require effort to command, and thinking that he had never, in 15 years, seen Ragnar Thornwall look quite so settled. He said nothing about the handprint. The handprint stayed for the entire council. Leif was 9 now and had opinions. This had always been true, but the opinions had expanded in scope and ambition. His current project was teaching Astrid to walk, despite the fact that Astrid was 6 months old and physically incapable of this. She is developing concentration, he explained to Elara, while propping his small sister upright for the 4th time in a row. It is important to start early. She cannot sit up unassisted yet, Elara said. She is trying, Leif said loyally. Astrid tipped over again. Leif caught her. She grabbed his hair with both hands and refused to let go. Ow, said Leif with great dignity. This is what happens, Elara told him, extracting small fingers from smaller fistfuls of hair. When you teach concentration to someone who is still working on hands. From the doorway, where he had arrived silently in the way he had of being present before you noticed him, Ragnar watched his son and his daughter and made no sound at all. Elara felt him there, the warmth of it, the particular weight of his presence, and looked over her shoulder. He was looking at her. Not at the children, for once. At her. With the same expression he had worn in the antechamber after the chandelier fell years ago. Unsettled, open, without the armor, except that now it had more to it. 3 years of marriage and 2 children and 10,000 mornings had added layers she did not have words for, only feelings. He crossed the room in 3 steps, bent, and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, with the same unhurried certainty he brought to everything. "You haven't eaten," he said against her hair. "How do you—" "You have the look," he said. "I have a look?" "When you haven't eaten," he said, already moving toward the door, "you get a line." He touched, briefly, the space between her brows. "There." She stared at him. "I'll have something sent," he said, and was gone. Leif looked up from where he was attempting to distract Astrid from his hair with a wooden horse. "Papa notices everything," he told her, as if this were wisdom she had not yet acquired. "I know," Elara said. She was still looking at the door. "He was like that with Mama, too," Leif said, carefully, in the way he always was when he mentioned his mother. Gentle with it, like handling something fragile that has learned to be strong. He always knew when she was cold. "I know," Elara said again, softer. She looked at this boy, serious, kind, brave, and felt the fullness of what she had been given, which was not a single thing but many. A child who brought her chestnuts and commissions for embroidered banners. A daughter who held on with both hands. A man who noticed the line between her brows. A king who had once called her a liar, and then learned better, and then, very slowly, learned something else entirely. Astrid said something emphatic and unintelligible from the floor. "I agree," Elara told her. That night, after the children were asleep and the palace had gone quiet, she found him in the courtyard again, their courtyard by habit, the one that faced south and sometimes had real sun. He was looking at the stars, which were out in force, the frost-marched sky doing what it did best when it decided to be beautiful. She brought 2 cups of warmed cider and handed him one without comment. He took it. Their fingers touched at the transfer, warm and brief. "Leif told me he wants to learn to sail," he said. "He told me he wants to teach Astrid to sail. She is 6 months old. He is optimistic. He gets it from you." She laughed. The sound rose in the cold air and she watched it go and felt him shift beside her, just slightly, just enough, so that the length of his arm pressed against hers. "Tell me something," she said. "What?" "Anything." She looked up at the stars. "You never tell me anything without a reason. Tell me something without a reason." A long pause. "I counted," he said. "The morning you shielded Leif in the pavilion." He paused again. "I counted the seconds between when I heard the crash and when I reached you. 14. Another pause. "I have counted other things since then. The number of times you laugh at Leif's stories before the punchline, because you can see it coming. The number of times you move toward cold people instead of away from them." He stopped. She waited. "I have lost count of those," he said. "There are too many." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the stars, which she understood now was his way of saying something that required not being looked at directly while it was being said. "Ragnar," she said. That is possibly the most words you have ever said to me at once." A beat. "Don't make it strange." "It's not strange," she said. "It's—" She searched for the word and found it. "It's the opposite of strange." He turned to look at her then. The stars were above them, cold and countless. The same stars that had hung over the frost march for 200 years of Thornwalls. His eyes were dark, but at the edges, in the moonlight, she caught the same shade she had seen in the training yard years ago. The color that had no name except that it existed only when he looked at her. "Come inside," she said. "It's cold." "You're always cold," he said. "You're always warm," she said. "It evens out." He looked at her for one more moment, the way he always looked at her, like he was still, faintly, surprised that she is real. And then he offered her his arm. She took it. They walked back into the warmth together, the door closing behind them on the winter night. the stars continuing without them, patient and uncountable and entirely unmoved. Inside, somewhere, Astrid was already awake again. He sighed. She laughed. The Alpha King of the Frost March could silence a room with a look. He could not silence his daughter. He did not, it turned out, want to.